Something is shaping your reality in this exact moment. It operates quietly, without permission or belief. It decides what you notice, what you avoid, and what you repeat. Most people never question it. They live inside it. Awareness is where its influence begins to change. This law is psychological, not philosophical. It is the law of cognitive interpretation, the brain's automatic process of assigning meaning before conscious choice engages. Your nervous system filters reality through learned expectations, emotional memory, and perceived safety. This is why two people can experience the same event and walk away with entirely different realities. The mind is not reacting to life itself. It is reacting to its interpretation of life. Modern psychology and neuroscience confirm this. The brain predicts before it perceives. It fills in gaps using prior conditioning. When these predictions go unexamined, they solidify into identity, behavior, and emotional patterns. Anxiety feels inevitable, limitation feels logical, and repetition feels like fate. But the moment you open yourself to noticing how meaning is assigned, the process slows. Awareness interrupts prediction. Say this internally. I notice how my mind is interpreting before I accept it. This activates executive awareness and reduces automatic emotional charge. Your nervous system begins learning that perception is adjustable. Here is what matters most. This law does not respond to force. It responds to conscious observation. When you open yourself to observing thoughts instead of merging with them, choice returns. The mind moves out of autopilot, emotional reactions lose urgency, and reality becomes flexible again, not because circumstances change instantly, but because interpretation does. As we move forward, you will learn how this law operates beneath emotion, belief, and behavior, and how to work with it deliberately instead of unconsciously. Before we continue, subscribe to this channel for psychology-based guidance that supports emotional safety, clarity of mind, and inner strength. Like this video intentionally, it helps this message reach others whose reality is being shaped without awareness. Share this content with someone who may be ready to open yourself to seeing what has been deciding their experience. Write in the comments, I am becoming aware of what is shaping my reality. Healing and growth do not begin with motivation. They begin with accurate awareness. Before change is possible, something must be seen clearly, not judged, not fixed, seen. Across psychology, one principle remains consistent. What enters awareness becomes workable. Cognitive, emotional, and behavioral models all agree on this foundation. When experiences remain outside conscious awareness, they continue to shape behavior indirectly. This is how emotional reactions feel automatic and why growth feels blocked without a clear reason. From a cognitive perspective, unexamined emotions drive assumptions. From an emotional regulation standpoint, unfelt feelings seek expression through anxiety, tension, or withdrawal. Trauma-informed frameworks add another layer. The nervous system prioritizes protection over accuracy when awareness is absent. These models converge on one truth. Awareness is the gateway to regulation. Emotional awareness does not mean intensifying feeling. It means locating it precisely. When you open yourself to noticing internal signals, pressure, urgency, heaviness, numbness, the brain begins integrating information instead of fragmenting it. Labeling emotion activates higher-order processing. This reduces reactivity and increases mental strength. The system shifts from survival response to adaptive response. Say this with clarity, I am noticing what is present without needing to escape it. This phrase trains the mind to remain engaged while the nervous system settles. Psychological growth accelerates when awareness becomes continuous rather than episodic. Instead of only reflecting after emotional collapse, you begin noticing signals earlier. Patterns reveal themselves before they solidify. Choice re-enters the process. Here is the empowering principle. Awareness does not weaken emotion, it organizes it. When emotion is organized, it no longer overwhelms, it informs. This is the transition from reaction to self-leadership. Mental strength is not emotional absence, it is emotional literacy. As awareness deepens, healing becomes directional. You stop guessing what needs attention. Growth stops being forced and starts being guided. Psychological principles move from theory into lived experience. This awareness now becomes the platform for reframing thought patterns, stabilizing responses, and reclaiming agency, not through effort, but through clarity. Write in the comments, I'm strengthening my mind through awareness. Every belief you hold began as a repeated thought. Not a truth, a rehearsal. Over time, repetition gave it authority, and authority shaped your behavior. This is how belief systems are built and how they are changed. From a psychological standpoint, affirmations are not motivational statements. They are cognitive inputs. In neuroscience and cognitive therapy models, repeated mental statements strengthen synaptic pathways through use-dependent learning. What fires consistently becomes efficient. The brain defaults to what is most familiar, not what is most accurate. This is why limiting beliefs feel automatic, and why intentional affirmations must be precise, regulated, and believable to work. Effective cognitive affirmations do not argue with the mind. They train it. In CBT and schema-based approaches, belief systems shift when new statements are repeated in emotionally neutral or regulated states. When affirmations are delivered without pressure, the nervous system does not resist them. Over time, these statements become internal reference points, guiding perception, interpretation, and reaction. When you open yourself to using affirmations as training rather than hope, the process changes. You are no longer trying to convince yourself of something unreal. You are installing supportive cognitive defaults. Say this declaratively. I choose thoughts that reinforce clarity, stability, and self-trust. Each repetition reduces cognitive noise and strengthens mental alignment. Here is what most people miss. Affirmations fail when they contradict identity. They succeed when they reshape it gradually. The brain updates belief systems through consistency, not intensity. Calm repetition outperforms emotional force. This is how neural pathways reorganize without internal backlash. The decisive principle activates here. Beliefs become real through repetition, not proof. Once a statement is repeated often enough in a regulated state, the mind stops questioning it. It becomes a baseline, and baselines dictate reality. Use this cognitive anchor daily. My beliefs are evolving to support who I am becoming. This aligns expectation with growth, allowing new behavior to feel natural instead of forced. As these belief systems stabilize, your internal dialogue changes tone. Resistance decreases, confidence becomes quieter and more reliable. This prepares the system for deeper regulation and sustained emotional control. Write in the comments, I am reinforcing belief systems that support my mental strength. Inner conflict is not confusion, it is competing instructions running at the same time. One part of you pushes forward, another pulls back, both feel urgent. And until this conflict resolves, emotional progress remains unstable. Psychology explains internal conflict as opposing motivational systems activating simultaneously. One system seeks growth, expansion, and change. The other prioritizes safety, predictability, and emotional protection. When these systems clash, the nervous system stays in a heightened state. Energy drains, focus fragments, progress stalls, not from lack of effort but from internal opposition. This is why emotional struggle often feels exhausting rather than difficult. You are not moving against life, you are moving against yourself. Therapeutic models emphasize that resolution does not come from choosing one side and suppressing the other. Suppression increases resistance. True resolution comes from integration, allowing both needs to be acknowledged within awareness. When the protective part feels seen, it stops escalating. When the growth-oriented part feels supported, it stabilizes. When you open yourself to noticing this dynamic instead of fighting it, the system begins to reorganize. Say this firmly: I allow my inner conflict to organize instead of dominate me. This statement signals safety and leadership at the same time. The nervous system responds to clarity, not force. Most internal conflict persists because it is interpreted as failure. But conflict is not malfunction. It is feedback. It reveals where values, fear, desire, and history intersect. When awareness replaces judgment, conflict loses its intensity. Emotional struggle transforms into information. Here is the psychological victory. When inner conflict resolves, emotional energy consolidates. What once felt divided becomes directional. Effort decreases. Motivation stabilizes. Progress becomes visible because it is no longer internally resisted. This is not self-control, it is self-alignment. Use this integration phrase when tension arises. Both parts of me are allowed, and I choose alignment. Each repetition reduces internal friction and increases coherence. As alignment strengthens, reactions soften, decisions become cleaner. Emotional responses regain proportion. You stop oscillating between extremes and begin moving steadily forward. This is the foundation of lasting emotional progress. Inner conflict does not disappear, it integrates, and integration is strength. Write in the comments, I choose psychological victory through inner alignment. The pattern starts before you finish noticing it. The same thought, the same emotional surge, the same outcome you already recognize. Repetition feels inevitable until it is interrupted. Repetitive mental patterns persist not because they are true, but because they are unquestioned. The mind follows familiarity. Once a sequence has run enough times, it executes automatically. Thought triggers emotion. Emotion drives reaction. Reaction confirms the belief. The loop closes. Clean, efficient, and unconscious. This is not a lack of willpower. It is a lack of interruption. Patterns dissolve through awareness applied during the sequence, not after it ends. Most people only reflect once the cycle has already completed. By then, the pattern has reinforced itself again. Change happens earlier. At the moment, recognition appears. Here is the decisive shift. You do not need to stop the thought. You need to stop following it. When you open yourself to noticing the first signal, urgency, tightness, familiar mental language, the loop weakens. The thought loses command status and becomes an object of observation. Distance appears, and distance creates choice. Say this assertively when the loop begins. This pattern does not get to finish automatically. This is not resistance, it is leadership. Most people believe they must replace an old pattern immediately with a better one. That belief keeps them stuck. The real work is simpler. Interrupt before replacement. A paused loop cannot reinforce itself. Repetition requires completion. Interruption removes momentum. Here is the critical realization. A pattern breaks the moment it fails to complete, not when it is solved, not when it is understood perfectly, when it is stopped mid-cycle. That interruption is enough to weaken it permanently if repeated consistently. Use this interruption phrase as soon as recognition appears. I choose a different response right now. Even silence counts. Even pause counts. Consistency matters more than intensity. With repetition, what once felt automatic begins to feel optional. The mind learns that old routes are no longer guaranteed, and when certainty disappears, the pattern loses authority. As these loops dissolve, space opens for new responses to form, not forced but available. This is how behavioral patterns change without internal struggle. Awareness does the work. Write in the comments, "I am interrupting cycles that no longer control me." Mental barriers are rarely loud. They do not announce themselves as fear. They present as certainty, as realism, as "this is just how I am." But a mental barrier is not truth. It is a conclusion repeated long enough to feel permanent. These barriers form when the mind learns that stopping feels safer than continuing. A moment of disappointment, rejection, or emotional overload teaches the system where to pause. Over time, that pause becomes identity. What once protected you quietly turns into a limit. Not because you lack ability, but because the mind stopped checking. Here is the grounded reality. Long-standing mental barriers persist only while they remain unquestioned. The moment awareness reaches the edge, rigidity softens. You do not need force to break a barrier. You need clarity to expose it. When you open yourself to noticing where you habitually stop, in effort, expression, expectation, you reveal the mechanism behind the block. Most barriers are not built from incapacity, but from outdated conclusions about emotional safety. Say this firmly, without emotion: "I am allowed to move beyond limits I did not consciously choose." This statement reintroduces permission, which the nervous system understands far better than pressure. Mental blocks often disguise themselves as logic. "I've tried before. It won't change." That's not realistic. These thoughts feel grounded, but they are rehearsed endpoints. Awareness does not argue with them. It steps past them. When you take action despite their presence, the barrier weakens. Evidence begins to accumulate. Identity adjusts. Here is the decisive truth. A mental barrier only exists at the level of belief, not at the level of capacity. The moment behavior contradicts the belief, authority shifts back to you. Confidence does not precede movement. Movement generates confidence. Use this grounding declaration when resistance appears. I step forward even while doubt remains. This is not defiance. It is alignment with possibility. As these barriers dissolve, emotional freedom becomes practical. You stop waiting to feel ready. You act from clarity instead of fear. Self-worth stabilizes not because you feel better, but because you trust your ability to move. This is how identity expands, quietly, steadily, and without collapse. Write in the comments, "I am moving beyond mental blocks with clarity and steadiness." Insight does not arrive as a breakthrough. It arrives as alignment, a quiet clarity that replaces urgency. A sense that decisions no longer need to be forced. This is mental awareness taking shape. In psychology, insight is described as meta-awareness, the ability to observe thoughts, emotions, and impulses without becoming absorbed by them. When this capacity strengthens, the mind shifts from reaction to response. Choices widen, emotional intensity lowers. Inner strength becomes functional rather than aspirational. Neuroscientific models show that insight emerges when integrative brain networks coordinate emotional input with executive control. Instead of emotions driving behavior directly, information flows through awareness first. This creates mental clarity, not by removing emotion, but by contextualizing it. Insight does not demand change. It guides it. When you open yourself to observing your inner experience without judgment, the nervous system stabilizes. Thoughts become signals, not commands. Feelings become information, not threats. This reduces internal noise and increases decision quality. You begin acting from understanding rather than impulse. Say this calmly, without emphasis. "I see what is happening within me, and I choose consciously." This reinforces awareness without activating pressure. Regulation and clarity remain intact. Educational psychology emphasizes that insight-based learning is durable. Once something is clearly seen, it does not need to be remembered forcefully. It becomes obvious. This is why awareness compounds over time. Each moment of insight makes the next easier to access. Mental clarity improves not because life simplifies, but because perception sharpens. You recognize patterns earlier, you adjust sooner, you recover faster. This is how inner strength becomes consistent, not through intensity, but through coherence. Here is the guiding principle. Insight accumulates through consistency, not revelation. No single realization carries the weight. Daily awareness does. Over time, effort decreases because understanding replaces struggle. As integration continues, action feels cleaner. You respond instead of brace. You decide instead of hesitate. Your internal guidance becomes dependable because it is informed, not reactive. This is what stable clarity looks like. Bright, grounded, ongoing. Write in the comments. I'm choosing clarity through awareness and insight. At some point, the mind draws a hard line. Not "this is difficult," not "this will take time," but "this is impossible." And once that conclusion settles in, reality shrinks around it. Psychological impossibilities are not born from lack of ability. They are born from finalized assumptions. The mind takes past outcomes, emotional pain, or repeated disappointment and turns them into permanent predictions. Over time, the brain stops testing. Effort feels pointless, hope feels naive, and what once felt open quietly closes. But here is the decisive truth. Impossible is not a fact, it is a forecast. And forecasts change when new data appears. The mind updates only when it is contradicted by action, not dramatic success. Movement. When you open yourself to acting where you expect failure even slightly, the system is forced to reassess. The brain does not need proof of victory. It needs proof that collapse did not occur. Say this with expectation, not force. I move even when certainty is absent. This interrupts the illusion of impossibility. Action becomes information. Information weakens the prediction. Most people wait for belief before they act. That keeps the impossible intact. The restructuring happens in reverse. Action first, belief later. When the mind observes you moving forward despite doubt, its authority over what is possible begins to erode. This is the emotional breakthrough. The impossible dissolves the moment the mind is forced to update its prediction. One step taken where none was expected fractures the conclusion. Momentum replaces hesitation. What once felt closed becomes unfinished, no longer forbidden, just unexplored. Use this triumphant declaration when resistance peaks. I am expanding what is available to me through action. Each repetition reinforces expectancy. The system begins to anticipate progress instead of failure. When you open yourself repeatedly to moving beyond old conclusions, identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone limited by the past and start experiencing yourself as someone in motion. Hope becomes practical. Confidence becomes earned. Psychological limits do not disappear all at once. They lose authority step by step. And as they do, emotional breakthrough stops being an event. It becomes a direction. Write in the comments, I am stepping beyond what once felt impossible. Purpose is not a destination you discover. It is a direction you choose. When direction is absent, effort scatters. Emotions feel busy but unproductive. Decisions feel heavy. Clarity returns when movement has an orientation. In psychology, life purpose functions as a regulatory framework for attention and motivation. Research in meaning-centered and self-determination models shows that when actions are aligned with a sense of purpose, emotional focus improves and stress becomes more tolerable. Purpose does not remove difficulty, it gives difficulty context. Without direction, the brain expends energy recalculating. Every choice feels equally demanding. This creates mental fatigue even in the absence of heavy workload. Purpose reduces this load by filtering decisions. What aligns receives energy. What does not loses urgency. Emotional focus sharpens naturally. From a neuroscientific perspective, purpose strengthens executive control. The prefrontal cortex prioritizes relevant information more efficiently when goals are meaningful. Distractions weaken, persistence increases. This is why people with a sense of direction often appear calmer under pressure. Their effort is organized. Here is the decisive insight. Purpose does not require certainty about the future. It requires commitment to a direction that matters now. When you open yourself to defining what you are moving toward, growth, contribution, stability, integrity, the system stabilizes. Purpose can evolve without collapsing focus. Direction can refine without being abandoned. Say this clearly: I move with intention, even as clarity continues to develop. This statement reinforces decisiveness without rigidity. The nervous system responds to orientation, not perfection. Purpose also improves emotional regulation. Stress is no longer interpreted as meaningless strain. It becomes part of a trajectory. This reframing reduces overwhelm and increases resilience. Effort feels cleaner. Recovery improves. Psychologically, purpose correlates with higher persistence, stronger emotional recovery, and greater self-regulation. Not because life becomes easier, but because the mind knows why it is moving. Let this guide you. Direction precedes motivation. You do not wait to feel inspired. You choose alignment, and inspiration follows action. As you open yourself to acting in accordance with what matters, emotional focus strengthens. Purpose stops being abstract and becomes operational. It guides attention, it organizes effort, it clarifies choice. Write in the comments, I am choosing direction that supports clarity and emotional focus.